Hi everyone, welcome along to DigiShift 85. This one is Social Warming with Charles Arthur. We're here today with the author of the book, Social Warming. Charles is an acclaimed technology journalist. You probably know him from The Guardian, various other places. We're going to explore today how platforms like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter or X and YouTube have inadvertently fueled polarization, misinformation and societal divisions. We're going to have a unique chance to hear some key insights from the book, and you'll also get a chance to take part in a Q&A with Charles. I'm not going to waffle on too long because I really want to get into this one and have a chance for discussion with Charles. So I'm going to hand over to Charles just now, and then we'll get into the chat.
Okay, morning everyone. I've got a slideshow that I'll, if the magic of Zoom actually works, then I'll kick it off and I'll give you the commentary as we go through. Let's see if it happens. Okay, so you should now be getting the first slide, social warming. Or what happens if billions of people have instant communications in their hands? The expectation was that when the smartphone came out, when the iPhone particularly really blazed the standards for how you could make a phone something everyone would have, that world knowledge would increase, everyone would have access to accurate information all the time, and we'd all be so much better informed. So the first part happened quite well. Smartphone ownership really rocketed. This is 2018, which is sort of 11 years after the smartphone format really took off, because Google with the Android form in 2008 was actually the big inspiration for the widespread sale of phones. So you have here, this is some data from Pew Research, a very reliable source. North Korea was absolutely gagging for smartphones. And even if you look at the emerging economies, you have countries such as South Africa and Brazil, which are above the average, and it's only countries like India, which back in 2018 was lagging back, but nowadays, I haven't actually updated these numbers, I'm afraid, but nowadays you'd expect these to be all up in the sort of the 60 plus, even for emerging economies. And just as a reminder of what global warming is, what we're talking about here, because obviously if I'm going to talk about social warming, we need to refer back to what global warming is. It's where you just have more energy, you have more people who are involved in it, you have more randomness in effect, because you have the unpredictable effects of many people doing many things. As I say here, with global warming, energy is like sort of adding gambling. You're throwing the dice more often. We saw the effects quite recently with the two big hurricanes in the US, which formed in surprising ways, which gathered energy in much more unexpected ways. And while you can't give any particular incident, you can't put your finger on it and say, well, this is definitely because of global warming or climate change. You can say that it does increase the probability. So the things that used to be a bit unsure, those things become much more likely. The certainties become likelihoods or possibilities. So, having Arctic ice through the summer becomes less likely. Having hurricanes that form very dramatically quickly and zoom across Florida becomes much more likely. So global warming is more energy in the system, more randomness, more unpredictability, and effects that you may not want to see. I got interested in this as a topic with the 2016 election, the Clinton versus Trump one, which came down to a few swing states. I mean, we're now much more familiar with this idea that, for example, with Biden against Trump, and now with Harris against Trump, that everyone talks about the swing states, the ones where just a few votes will make the difference. The thing about 2016 was it was really the first US presidential election where Facebook advertising was used as a big factor in trying to influence people. The Trump campaign didn't spend that much money on TV advertising, whereas the Clinton campaign did. The Trump campaign did lots of targeted Facebook advertising, particularly in these three states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, which had all previously been very rock solid Democratic blue states. In the US election in 2016, they all turned red, but not by very much. These figures are actually slightly wrong, so I've corrected them. It's actually 77,000 people made all the difference in the 2016 election, and that was 0.09% of all the votes cast. It's a very tiny number. It's one of those things where it's such a marginal change that you'd say, well, this is almost just random fluctuation. But of course it wasn't, because Trump did all this work on Facebook and tried to, in effect, G up people who might have had a different opinion before, just to either make them less likely to vote for less likely to vote for Clinton, or more likely to vote for him. This is the sort of effect that we have. Social networks squeeze people together. They put people together who are less likely in other situations to come across each other. And we have algorithms which are doing this. So my thinking was about social warming that it's rather like the effect with fossil fuels. The people who got into using fossil fuels, well, the alternative at the time was things like whale oil and so on for candles. Fossil fuels were much more available, more widely. They were cheap, but the intention was never to cause global warming. But of course they did. And in the same way, creators of social networks had good intentions, which was to let everyone connect, share ideas. Of course, there's the owners of the social networks would have the nice side effect for them of making money. But all the other effects that they've caused weren't intentional, but they've come across. And this is the book I wrote. That's the front cover. Anyone who's ever written a book will know that writing books is only the first part of the fight. The second part is what you're going to do on the cover and stuff. But I think that was a rather effective cover. We had a lot of discussion about what to put on it. The question was, how do you recognize it? What are the causes? Can you forecast things from it? Are there examples? What are the risks? And obviously, it's important to point out that social networks are not necessarily bad in themselves. For example, there was this case a few years ago of a dog which had been left behind in the California wildfires. The owners wanted to take the dog with them, but the dog refused to go. The dog's name was Odin, and he stayed with a whole load of goats that the family owned. And when they came back, they found the dog was still there, had protected the goats, had burns on his feet, but had somehow survived. So they just put out a call on the social networks for money to fund his veterinary care. And as you can see, they almost got double what they were asking for. So there is actually social potential, social surplus, social benefit that we can find from social networks. So it's not always bad. And of course, in the same way, driving is very useful. If you need the ambulance to drive you to the hospital because you're having a heart attack, then you probably don't worry about the global warming effects. You think, my need is much more important at the time. So at the local level, social networks have this benefit that they connect families, they connect friends. The idea of Facebook initially was that it would let people stay in touch with each other, which wasn't possible in the past. I've pretty much lost touch with all the people I knew at university. I wouldn't have any way of getting in touch with them. Wouldn't even be able to remember their names. But the thing that happened with the social network was that the character changes dramatically when you add more people who are not part of your network, when you add news, which has its own polarizing effects, and you add algorithms which are trying to keep people on the networks for longer. So the reason why the algorithms are there comes down to a simple one-sentence answer. We live in the attention economy where it's all about how long you can get someone to spend on your product. All sorts of other things are competing for your attention. Netflix has said that its competition is people sleeping. For Facebook, for Twitter or X, for TikTok, for all these social networks, the real competition is every other thing that you might do. So what they want to do is to have algorithms which will maximize the time that you spend on them. But this is a bad combination, because what tends to happen is that the thing that grabs your attention is outraging content, stuff that really gets you saying, how can someone possibly be saying this? This is absolutely ridiculous. There have been studies done which show that the most polarizing, the most attention-getting form of content is when people are doing things that we think are bad rather than things that we think are good. A professor called Molly Crockett did some analysis where people had reported things that they found either good or bad in their daily lives, and showed that the bad stuff was what people noticed the most, and bad stuff on the internet was what they noticed a great deal, because the internet brings you more bad stuff, whereas daily life tends not to. And you might wonder, well, why is it that outrage captures our attention in this way? It's actually got a quite deep evolutionary reason, which is that about, what is that, 200? I can't do the maths in my head. But some time ago, Homo sapiens went through this little bottleneck when there weren't so many of them, they weren't very broadly spread out. And what you needed was for the tribe to stay together. And outrage is an effective tool for keeping people in the tribe. If you outrage the tribe and you are then exiled from the tribe, your life chances are pretty much zero. So it's very important to be able to recognize when something is outraging and to either stay away from doing it, or to tell the person who's doing it that you don't like them very much and that they risk being excluded from the tribe. That's why, as much as anything, humans are social animals, but also, we're more effective as tribes. We're far more able to survive in hostile situations, whereas the individual doesn't. And that's a key difference, really, between humans and many other animals, because we just need to have this survival instinct which keeps us together. And when it comes to what sort of outrage works, lying is actually a very effective one. And once you move to a situation like we're in now, where outrage doesn't exclude you from a tribe necessarily, or being excluded from the tribe doesn't mean that you're going to die imminently, you can do all sorts of things with lies. And you'll see this on many social networks. Things that are completely untrue will get a lot of traction. So, for example, just last night, there have been a couple of people in the US who claimed that they entered their votes into a Dominion voting machine and it changed their vote. Now, this is so far from likely that it's pretty much impossible to believe. Far more likely is that the person just didn't actually put their vote in the right place, and the machine responded to that. The machine works correctly, and it's the human that's at fault. But this has been amplified by people such as Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's a congresswoman who is absolutely fabulous at telling lies and gets enormous amounts of attention for doing so. And it's also been put out by Republicans in their emails overnight. So the lies spread far more effectively than the truth. And the question is, why do social networks allow this to happen? Why do they leave these lies up? And this is, I'm going to show you play a bit of video here, which is someone at Facebook being asked about, oh no, sorry, that comes in a little bit, but the social networks say it's not a big problem. So this was Mark Zuckerberg not long after the 2016 election, when people said, well, a lot of this trouble came about because of Facebook and the lies that were being spread by the Trump campaign about Clinton. And Zuckerberg views this as a rather strange construction, which is more than 99% of what people see is authentic. I mean, this may be the case, but that's not necessarily what they pay attention to. If you actually look at how much attention is paid to stuff that's not authentic, you find that, and again, this is back in 2017, just to show the sort of attention that things get, you get a lot of engagement for these things which are fake. And it's the non-true content which people pay attention to, because it's outraged. They're just amazed that these things could be true. Charles Manson to be released on parole couldn't really happen because I think he had died. But people find that outraging, and so they spend a lot of time paying attention to it. And this creates what I call an unvirtuous circle. You have the content that causes the outrage. The algorithms see that people are paying attention to it, and so they show it to more people. You have to moderate it just for legal purposes, but you then find that what happens is more content that causes outrage comes along to replace it. And the overall effect is that you get more polarization, because the lies tend to split people into the tribes who believe it, the tribes who don't. You have more extreme views because, again, you want to push towards one end or the other of the lies. You have more collision of the views because the people who think one thing is true disagree with the people who think it's otherwise. And the effects on democracy is that unrepresentative views are amplified, such as the Marjorie Taylor Greene thing, suggesting the machines are all fixed. So I looked at a few effects and examples because it seemed to me there was an important question hanging over my whole hypothesis, which was, can we actually say that there are any places where we went from not having these smartphones and not having the internet in effect, and that things went badly? Turns out there is an example. Myanmar in July 2016, they went from really not having the internet at all in 2010 to having smartphones everywhere. Very cheap smartphones flooded the place. Facebook was the only social network that anyone had ever come across. People didn't know what Facebook was intended to do. They just saw that it provided them with lots of local news. Facebook wasn't able to moderate it because it wasn't able to, its moderators, it had two moderators for the entire country. They were based in Ireland rather than in Myanmar. And Facebook's automatic system for recognizing outraging content, especially content that was othering people, that was in effect comparing the Rohingya Muslims, who are a minority, to animals, which was a common tactic used by the Buddhist majority. Facebook systems couldn't recognize it because it was using the wrong language set. So the effect in time was that the Buddhist majority became so polarized against the Rohingya Muslims that the government there was able to use this as an effect, as an excuse to carry out mass killings, which led to many Rohingyas leaving as refugees. But there are also many examples which are in the book where you had riots, killings, based on entirely untrue rumors that have been spread through Facebook and which no one had been able to moderate. India, even back when smartphones were not a widespread thing, WhatsApp is gigantic in India. It's absolutely colossal. You have no idea how big it is. It's been adopted so quickly there that it's effectively the only method of communication. And rumors spread on WhatsApp. They would go viral. People would be beaten up in the street. People would be killed in the street. The problem there again is that you could, although there was already a sort of a likelihood that you'd get this sort of this sort of division and polarization between the Muslims and the Hindus. What the smartphone did and what the arrival of the social networks did was to make it a lot easier for people who were going to commit this sort of violence to become inflamed and outraged by it. Again, in the Philippines in 2016, you had the election of Duterte, which was helped very much by lots of lies that were spread on Facebook. There's the fabulous Brexit referendum, where the Leave campaign gathered a lot of people who it encouraged to vote for the first time ever. More people voted then than had ever voted before through Facebook. And there was a lot of misinformation spread by the Leave campaign on Facebook. Obviously, there was the Trump 2020, the insurrection in 2021, where a lot of what happened there was spread by false claims made on social media, particularly Twitter. So you have to wonder whether any lessons have been learned about this. And Facebook was asked about, this is a couple of years ago now, but about a video of Nancy Pelosi, who was then the Speaker of the House. A video appeared on Facebook which had been slowed down so that she appeared to be slurring, and she was asked, sorry, not Pelosi, but one of Facebook's people was asked on CNN why they hadn't taken this video down. And I'll,
in the wake of the 2016 election, obviously Facebook has repeatedly told Congress, the American people, that you're serious about fighting disinformation, fake news.
The sound's very quiet on that, Charles.
sorry, is the video coming across?
The video came, but the audio was very quiet.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure I can do about that.
In the wake of the 2016 election, obviously Facebook has repeatedly told Congress, the American people, serious about fighting disinformation.
Just have to turn the audio up, I guess. I'm sorry, I can't.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, damn.
If you try resharing and making sure you're sharing audios, check. That's something that catches me out all the time.
So try resharing and
Yeah, so stop the share, and then as you start again, look for a share audio, because that's sometimes unchecked
oh,
for
okay.
some reason that is.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, I'll just go past it because
Okay, fine. Yeah.
it's a short interview where Facebook
Yeah.
basically says is asked, why are you not taking this video down? And she says, well, obviously we have fact checkers who will say that this thing is false. The trouble there is that it takes quite some time. It could take a day or longer for the fact checking to appear on videos, but they're not going to remove it. They're going to let the untrue stuff remain there, even though they know it's untrue. Everyone is telling them it's untrue, and they can see that it's creating problems. And you have to think that the real reason why they're doing this is not because they have some great devotion to the truth and to letting everything be there, but because they like the people looking at it. People look at it, and that means they're spending time on Facebook. It's that rather than any. This is the problem. Social networks don't have a devotion to the truth. They have a devotion to people looking at them. So the next question is anyone actually trying to fix this? And people like Apple and Google through Android have been trying to do things, telling people how much time they're spending on their screen. A few years ago, Apple introduced the screen time system, and I think Android has a similar sort of thing. And the idea that we're all spending too much time doom scrolling is one that has become quite embedded, I think, as a sort of social idea. But this tends not to stop people doing it. People still do sit in restaurants and cafes and just scroll through their phones, rather than having a great sort of aim to fix things. And the question that sort of arises is, even where you can persuade people about this, is the whole problem with social warming, is it the left-hand one? Is it global warming? Or is it the right-hand one, which was the ozone hole? And with the ozone hole, which was caused by CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, it was actually feasible to get all the companies that made them together in a room and have concerted action where they agreed to reduce what they did with it. That would be like getting all the social network companies together and getting them to agree to reduce the amount of inflammatory content, the speed with which they moderate, the aims of their algorithms, rather than the whole sort of global warming effect, which is what you see in the left-hand picture, where everything just gradually gets worse and worse and worse. And there's a sort of problem with networks, which is what I call the moderation gap, that as the network gets so much bigger, the problem grows geometrically. You add people on numerically and linearly, so you go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, but the number of potential connections grows so much more quickly that the problem for moderators of trying to tamp all this down just gets wildly out of hand. And that's always been Facebook's challenge. It's always been the challenge for all of the social networks, which is in effect, they're fighting themselves, because they have algorithms which show you things that will make you spend more time on them, which is going to be outraging content, which is going to tend to be lies. And the moderators have the challenge of, well, do we leave this outraging content up? So, for example, Facebook has had a problem, and I think Twitter has the problem, probably TikTok, where old videos of children being abused in one way or another, physically abused, will tend to get uploaded again and again over periods of years. And the same video keeps coming up. It'll be slightly tweaked to get past the algorithms that are meant to spot it. So the moderators, in effect, are always fighting a fire. But the algorithm that tries to show people interesting content is always trying to show it to people, because people look at it and are horrified, outraged, say, I can't believe this is on Facebook, tell all their friends about how I can't believe this video is on Facebook, and share it with them. So there's this continuing problem about networks as they grow larger. So the obvious answer to how you fix it is you have smaller networks, or you have more moderation, or you have a different way of measuring when things are good for your social network. Engagement is the one that they tend to measure it by, time spent. But you could sort of see that it might be useful if you had a social network that was all about accuracy. And to some extent, Twitter in its old days used to be more about that. The use of the verified accounts, where those were attached to journalists, made it much easier to recognize what was disinformation and what was more reliable. And also, I think restrictions on political advertising is the sort of thing that would make a huge difference, because political advertising, although it's, it makes a fair bit of money for some of them, Twitter forswore it a few years ago, and it didn't seem to make a big difference to it. The difficulty with having smaller networks is that they tend to be less interesting. So you look at some of the ones that are growing now. There's Blue Sky, for example, or there's Threads, and it's quite weird. Threads has more users, I think, or as many users as Twitter or X. But what's happened is that because of the way their algorithm works, you just get lots of rage bait. That is the stuff that gets the biggest engagement. It's sort of things like, I can't see why people would ever have a dishwasher, and sort of rather flat little sort of claims like this then tend to get hundreds of replies saying, well, you must be stupid. Why can you not see why people want a dishwasher? I have to work all the day. On Blue Sky, it's slightly different. It doesn't have an algorithm to show you stuff. And that comes across as quite a bland sort of network in my experience, but possibly it's more effective. The idea of having a network which is based around truth and accuracy, where you get outvoted for actually being accurate, is a nice idea, but the trouble is, who decides what's true? And the political ads, as I said, is something that's not necessary for them, but they certainly seem to like the money. But I think that the problem there is that you're never going to persuade Americans not to have political advertising. So these are my sort of conclusions, which is that social warming is very much a thing that you can see. The Myanmar example is the most stark one, but you see it all the time. You see it with people who feel obliged to sort of let their deepest and worst thoughts out. I mean, there was the woman, the Tory councillor, who was recently jailed. I think it was earlier this week for comments that she made on social media. And she was basically encouraging people to go and burn, if I recall this rightly, go and burn down an asylum hotel, which is not really the sort of thing that you'd normally want to sort of say beyond your living room. But because she's using a social network, she feels that somehow she's free to say these things. She probably looked forward to the engagement that it would get. She didn't feel any inhibition about it. That to me is a sort of social warming. It's a loss of the inhibitions that you would expect people to have. The trouble is, again, social media amplifies, but it doesn't pick out accuracy. It picks out what people will engage with most. The effect on democracy is a big and very visible symptom. You can just pull in examples from all over. I mean, I didn't even start to look at the African continent, where it's a big feature in some of the most pivotal elections, such as Nigeria and Kenya. And yeah, overall, it is a sort of warming. And although the example with Odin the dog shows that it can be good, mostly you tend to see examples where it's not so good. What the balance is a very difficult one to decide, I think. And it's the size that's the problem, definitely. Though there's a weird thing going on where Facebook, which is obviously the biggest of the networks, has found that people just aren't actually interacting enough with it. They're not putting enough content. Not enough humans are putting content in. So Facebook is now starting to encourage its AI systems to create content. And Instagram, which has more than 1 billion users, is doing the same. It's starting to put AI content in to get people more engaged, because people seem to be tiring almost of being hectored and trying to be encouraged to be angry with things. So possibly this will self-correct in time, but the fact that things are slightly better than they were is not always the best outcome, I think. And if I had to give advice about how to overcome one's own tendency to social warming, it tends to be just to think, just to reflect before you write something, before you repost something, before you comment on something. I mean, for myself, I frequently find myself just about to write a reply to something, and then I think, actually, this will just make things worse, and so I just delete it. It's easy to get into that sort of habit of just thinking, no, actually, I don't need to do this, and looking around for more positive content and reposting that. I tend to think, perhaps I'm wrong, but I hope that that's the best approach to dealing with this. That if you can spread the good news rather than the bad news, then at least you won't be the key bad influencer. And that's the end of my presentation. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Charles. That was great. That was really good. Really good. There's lots of chat about which social networks we're going to quit next. In the chat. John, do you want to come on?
I mean, that's a really interesting chat. It's really interesting seeing people's reflections there about choices they're making. I think one thing I was wondering about, because I think there's a really strong parallel here, is Charles, in your work, you're a journalist, a writer, you're looking to reach audiences with meaningful, accurate stuff. And I think a lot of charities are in that place as well, where, we've got sort of authentic, important messaging we want to get out there. And one reason why a lot of charities are drawn to social media is it's a way to get to audiences you haven't met before. That's the dilemma a lot of organizations, I think, is going, these channels have been really useful to us, but they're really problematic spaces as well. And I wondered if you had any reflections about approaching social media with a kind of a purpose in mind, if you know what I mean.
I guess you have to think of it as it's sort of like feeding a wild animal away in a way, isn't it? It's you're hoping that it will like you, but you have to be prepared for the possibility that it's going to bite you. I suppose, I mean, sort of taking my last point, I think that if you're able to initially at least have a sort of a good news message, then people will find that easier to take at first. But obviously, as a charity, then sometimes you've got bad news to tell people about neglect and about the importance of the charity's message. So I suppose it's a question of mixing the good and the bad, having the two steps forward, one steps back sort of approach. Perhaps you have the two dollops of good news, and then you sort of give them the less good as well. Possibly it's about framing. Possibly it's about how you see yourself. That is the charity. How the charity sort of views itself as a participant in social media. Are you there to broadcast? Are you there to interact with people who already need the help of the charity? Are you there to interact with people who might fund the charity? I mean, I can't sort of answer those questions because I think it's going to be different for every charity. But I think trying to social networks generally reward authenticity. So for a charity, you have to figure out what is the authentic character for the charity on social media. How actually does it want to present itself, and how does it want to be? Because you can't sort of be, as a charity, the social media presence can't be, one day it's sort of all happy and smiley, and then the next it's all combative and you never, the governor's never thanked us. We hate this government, sort of thing. You have to. It has to be a personality, and it has to be a personality, I guess, that people want to engage with. So that's the sort of thing.
That's a really good point. Aisha's made a really good point just in chat about Aisha, feel free to elaborate if you'd like to, but what you made about charities had a sort of truthful, respected voice, but the level of distrust.
Oh yeah.
And I was thinking of a similar thing of a kind of a rebound effect, where the problem with disinformation is not that we suddenly believe all the false things, but we stop believing all the things. And you have thoughts on that?
I've just seen Dave's comment about, does charity social media need to be a broadcast channel that funnels people into spaces you can control? I think that's difficult. I mean, the whole idea of that you funnel people into things, the social network itself is going to resist that. They don't want people to go away. They want people to stay engaged, and the people who are on the social networks will tend to, they're there because they've chosen to be there. It's probably not an accident that they're on the social network rather than on your website. So the challenge for you is more to be this presence that they think of, so that at some point, I mean, it's a sort of brand marketing thing usually, rather than a call to action, isn't it? It's that they want to think about you as the thing, rather than you doing a call to action every time. So come here and do our fundraiser. So an example I think of is, there's a guy called Neil Harbison. Does any of you know Neil Harbison? The dogs in Thailand. Okay, he has a charity called Happy Doggo, but you would never know it that he has a charity. But it obviously must be a charity. He is an Irish guy who woke up one morning in Thailand, decided he was doing nothing with his life, and decided that what he would do was help the street dogs of Thailand. And he has basically gone around giving them food, sterilizing them, because the big problem for dogs is when they breed too quickly, then there are too many of them, they don't have enough food, and they're just in a terrible state. And he posts on Instagram, he posts on Twitter, possibly he's on Facebook as well. And he just has these sort of happy stories, happy dogs, him, sort of rescuing these dogs. The dogs perhaps need surgery, they have to go to the vet, but he comes up with a happy story at the end. Or he says, well, we're still working on this. There is never a call to action. There's never, come and give me some money. It'd be great if you would give me some money. Never does that. It sort of says, it'd be great if you gave me a follow on Instagram. Never asks for money. And I keep thinking, this is absolutely brilliant, because people will keep coming back. He has hundreds of thousands of followers, and there must be it only needs a small proportion of those people think, yeah, I should give some money to this guy, because this must cost him something, to keep it all ticking over. And I think that's the sort of thing that is most effective. Neil is spelt. Actually, I'll type it in here. That's not quite spelled. Because I think he's a great model for how to do a social media presence for a charity, and yet make it look like you're not a charity, and you're just you're just one person. I mean, obviously he's a front person. He has a lot of charisma. He's really good at what he does, and it's a subject that people can engage with, because he doesn't like a happy dog. Not as challenging as many charities might find it, but that sort of thing where someone becomes the face of the charity, where they make it effectively invisible what they're doing, but they're doing it really well. I think that's a fantastic model. And also, it's not it's not social warming. It's not warming. It's sort of uplifting.
I was running a workshop with charities recently, and someone in the group brought up Neil's videos, and I've never actually seen them before, and so, yeah, it's a really nice example. And I think that there's a big thing for me as well with charities. They're trying to operate in a space that reflects what social media looked like a decade ago, and actually have not moved on with the fact that we're living in algorithmically driven timelines, and simply putting a thing up saying, come to our thing on a Tuesday, or give us money, or click this link, just don't work. They've not worked for a long time, but we're still getting into this thing where we kind of feed the beast. And I think for me, one of the big things that I found quite difficult, in particular reading your book, is like, there was a lot of virtue signaling about people leaving X and Twitter, and people did it for the right reason, but people left because X and Twitter no longer provided a value. So if we're brutally honest, that's the big reason a lot of people left that platform, because unless you're a right-wing nut job, you're not getting the level of traction that you got 7 years ago. What we've not seen is people leaving meta products when we know actually the harm that they've caused in elections globally is pretty colossal. And if we actually want to take some ethical decisions, we probably need to take a long, hard look at pretty much every single one of these platforms. So I think there's that. I mean, you made that point, Charles. There's a balance to be struck of, if this is a key vehicle for people living with a health condition and they're on a Facebook group and there's 5,000 people, it's not a great ethical decision to just close that group because of something that happened in Malaysia. But you need to make those trade-offs. And I think there needs to be much more open, transparent discussions about the ethics within the charity sector around these big tech companies that we're engaging.
Rachel, you got a hand, and I think you got a good point in chat as well. Go for it.
Yeah, I've just put something in the chat and then going to ask a completely unrelated question. But
Go for it.
I think, some of what we're talking about feels like it's centered, the response is centered a lot in how people can individually behave. But is there any hope of regulation or something that might effectively, stop what some of the platforms are able to do? Because although we can take our own personal responsibility and do the education part, there's also surely some role for regulation of these people who are behaving as if they are unregulatable.
I'm going to disappoint you and say no.
I didn't
because I mean, I think experience shows us already. The social networks predate the smartphone pretty much. I mean, Facebook is 2004. MySpace was older than that. We've had sort of forms of these sorts of things for decades now, and they are not. I mean, governments are sort of taking notice of them, but they're not taking notice of them in a don't let people say things that are abusive sort of way. Even with the new bill in the UK and the sort of the Digital Services Act, I think it is in the EU. They're not really, they're always corralled by things like free speech, and the difficulty of, well, you say that sort of crosses the line beyond abusive, but they don't. Who's going to decide? We're going to get a judge to decide. Do you really have the money for that? I think you have to expect that you're not going to get someone else to come in and help you in that respect, and that you have to find the approach where you bring people along with you. You get all the you get the street dogs of Twitter to or Facebook or whatever to come along with you, by giving them the food that they want. Which I know sounds a bit weird and sort of, are you really leaving me out here in the cold without giving me an easy solution? But the trouble is that there really aren't easy solutions on this. It's once you have companies which can do this, and if they can do this, they will do this. Once you have governments which have many other bigger problems, really, then the reality of it is that you have to sort of figure it out for yourself. You have to know that the problem is there. You have to know that that there are going to be people who are going to latch onto things and are just going to be difficult and abusive. But there are also people who are going to be receptive to your message and who will come with you. So the question is, do you live your life by the people who shout at you in the street, or do you live your life by the people who you live with in your house and work with in your office? I think most people would actually think that they set their things out not by the people who shout at them in the street.
Yeah.
There was a really good point in the chat, and I think it might have been Dave that brought it up, but just, I guess what we're thinking about when we think in this context is not just that we've put all our eggs in one basket and now social media doesn't work for us and we don't have the budget to make it work for us, but actually thinking about what are the things that we do have control of, and whether that's your blog or newsletter list or your website, and actually starting to think about a much broader approach to digital, which I think the best charities have been doing for a very long time anyway, but a lot of organizations have fallen into the trap of everything happens through Facebook, everything happens in this Twitter account, and actually we need to think about what are those spaces we can own and control, and it's not at the whims of a megalomaniac billionaire.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, I think that having spaces that you control, like Dave referred to earlier, that certainly is valid. That's if you have the energy to run your own forums and stuff, then sure. But you have to be aware that your forums will attract trolls just the same as all social networks do, and possibly you don't have the stomach to or the time or the resources to look after them in the same way. I mean, a lot of what happens on social networks is the duck paddling under the water. It looks pretty simple, but a lot of the reporting and things like that is difficult. But yes, I mean, a forum that you control is going to be enormously preferable in many ways in terms of being able to control the discussion. But you won't have the you don't get the serendipity that you get on a social network. You don't get the chance that someone will happen along and will be your perfect donor and is exactly the person you want. They have to find you. So again, the question is, can you funnel those people to your forum, or are they actually going to be happier to stay where they were already? It's always that tension. There's the space you can control, but there's the problem of how do you get people to leave the place they were in.
Yeah. This one thing I wanted to do, just because we're getting to this now, is just Rachel had an excellent point in the chat, which I think is worth surfacing, which is about if you're a charity which is calling out misogynistic or really awful behavior, quite often there's a really nasty rebound effect where you post that and then lots of people double down and amplify the stuff you're trying to campaign against, which has a, that is a really difficult situation because, what we need to do is be able to challenge stuff where if you're looking at, say, domestic abuse or discrimination or something like that, you need to be able to call it and say that's not on. The other quick one was Dave and I were having a slightly tongue-in-cheek chat about maybe imagine social media is like a nightclub and you go there with your sandwich board on and say, and that led me to think the point I think that you made, Charles, is about, maybe size isn't everything. So maybe if your analogy is some platforms are like a bar, you maybe don't go to the biggest nightclub in town because you're maybe not going to make much of an impression there, and it might be a bit wild. Maybe you go down your local and stick a poster by the darts board or something, just to ring a metaphor for all it's worth. But yeah, and maybe that is, I mean, who knows what the future is, but maybe it is like smaller networks that are more differentiated, perhaps.
I mean, the whole idea around Mastodon is that you can have a sort of federated social network. They can have social networks within the bigger social network, which could work. That you have there's a single server which provides a context for people to work on, to interact on. And that can then, as it chooses, connect to other servers. And Threads is actually part of this. You can federate threads. So, the Mastodon software, I mean, it requires some technical expertise to set it up.
Yeah.
But that would be a possibility where you might be able to take that forward, and in effect, that becomes the forum that you want.
Great. We've got to nearly 11 o'clock, and I know some people will probably need to get away. It's been great to hear from you, Charles, and I think, like Ross, I would really recommend the book. It's really insightful, and I think lots more we could discuss about at more length. So thanks all for the time, and I'm sorry about the glitch with joining the call this morning, but we got there. So thanks again, everyone, and we'll catch you next time.
Terrific. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was great.